The knock came at exactly 1:12 in the morning. Not frantic, not polite, just 3 slow, deliberate knocks that echoed through the quiet cabin like someone already knew I was awake. I looked up from the old clock radio sitting on my workbench. The tiny red numbers glowed in the darkness while the rain hammered against the windows. Nobody visited this far outside of Cedar Hollow after midnight, not unless they were lost, broken, or carrying trouble that refused to wait until sunrise. I wiped the wood dust from my hands onto my jeans and crossed the small living room barefoot. At 29, my life had become strangely predictable. I repaired old furniture during the day, read mystery novels at night, and convinced myself that a quiet life was the same thing as a happy one. The second knock came just as my hand touched the doorknob. Then silence. When I opened the door, the cold wind rushed inside first. She stood beneath the porch light with rain dripping from the ends of her dark hair. Emma Brooks, the girl who had once beaten me in every bicycle race through our neighborhood, the girl who used to steal fries off my plate and insist they somehow tasted better than her own, the girl who had kissed me exactly once beneath the old railroad bridge when we were 18, then disappeared from my life less than a year later without ever explaining why I hadn't seen her in almost 8 years. Yet somehow I recognized her before my brain accepted that she was real. She wasn't alone. A little boy no older than 3 slept against her shoulder beneath a faded blue blanket. His tiny sneakers dangled near her waist, soaked by the rain. A backpack hung from one shoulder, and a small duffel bag rested beside her. Feet Emma looked exhausted, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that settles behind a person's eyes after carrying too much. For too long, for several seconds. Neither of us spoke. Then she lifted her gaze to mine. Ethan, my name sounded unfamiliar, coming from her voice after so many years. I didn't know where else to go. That was all she managed. Before her knees buckled, I caught her before she hit the porch. The little boy stirred, but didn't wake for one impossible second. It felt like time had folded in. Half 8 years vanished. The unanswered questions, the anger, the lonely birthdays, the nights I convinced myself I imagined everything between us. None of it mattered while she was collapsing into my arms. Emma, she blinked slowly. I'm okay. She wasn't. Her forehead burned. Against my hand, I picked up the duffel bag with one arm, lifted the sleeping child with the other, and guided Emma inside before the storm could follow us. Her cabin wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a stone fireplace that smoked whenever the wind changed direction. Most of the furniture had passed through my workshop before, finding a permanent home inside. Nothing matched except the warm color of polished oak. Emma looked around as though she was stepping into someone else's memory. As you still smell like cedar, she whispered. I almost laughed. You still notice everything. The corner of her mouth moved just enough to remind me what her smile used to look like. Then she swayed again. Sit. I don't want to make a mess. You already brought half the storm inside. I'm sorry. You always apologize before doing something. Impossible. That earned me the faintest smile. She lowered herself carefully onto the couch, while I carried the little boy into the bedroom. He never opened his eyes. His tiny fingers stayed wrapped around the edge of the blanket, like he was afraid someone might take it away. I covered him with one of my quilts. Children always looked impossibly peaceful when they slept. Adults rarely had that luxury. When I returned, Emma was staring at the fireplace. Drops of rain fell steadily from her coat onto the wooden floor. You still hate asking for help, I said. I still do. So this must be serious. She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes wandered across the room until they stopped on an old photograph sitting beside the bookshelf. Us 17 years old, covered in flour after losing a pie baking contest at the county fair because we'd somehow started throwing dough at each other instead of actually baking. I had forgotten that picture was even. "There, you kept it," she whispered. "I forgot to throw it away." She looked at me. "That's a terrible lie. I know, you were always bad at lying. You were always worse." For the first time since she'd arrived, an actual laugh escaped her. Tiny, weak, almost swallowed by exhaustion. But real, it hit me harder than I expected. Because somewhere beneath, the woman sitting on my couch, the girl I loved, was still alive. I disappeared into the hallway and returned with dry clothes, grey sweatpants, oversized hoodie, both far too big for her. "I'll leave these. Here, Ethan. Bathrooms. On the left." She looked down at herself as if she'd only just realized she was completely soaked. "I must look awful. You look cold. I wasn't fishing for compliments, and good. Why?" "Because I've never been very good at giving them." She rolled her eyes exactly the way she used to. "There he is." "Who?" "The sarcastic carpenter. I've been promoted to what?" "Grumpy carpenter." She actually smiled that time, not because the joke was funny, because it was familiar. She disappeared into the bathroom, quietly closing the door behind her. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. 8 years. 8 years without a phone call, without a letter, without even an explanation, and now she was standing inside my home wearing my clothes while a little boy slept in my bed. None of it made sense. I filled the kettle. Anyway, some habits survive heartbreak. Emma always drank chamomile tea whenever she couldn't. Sleep, 1 spoonful of honey, never sugar. Hated that I still remembered. I hated even more that remembering felt effortless. When she came back wearing my hoodie, the sleeves covered most of her hands. Her damp hair rested against the faded navy fabric, and for one dangerous second she looked exactly like the girl who used to borrow my jackets after football games because she was always cold and always refused to admit it. "You still make tea, you still borrow my hoodies." "I wasn't planning on keeping this one. You kept my favorite flannel in 2017. She froze. I noticed. "I thought you forgot to, and I remembered everything." Silence settled between us, heavy, not uncomfortable, just crowded with years. Neither of us knew how to cross. I handed her the mug. She wrapped both hands around it before taking the smallest sip. "Still too hot." She blew across the surface. Exactly 3 times. Another habit. Another memory. "You always waited." "Exactly 3 breaths," I said before thinking. She looked up slowly. "You remember that?" "I remember too much." Her eyes shimmered for a moment before she looked away. "I'm sorry." I leaned back into the armchair opposite the couch. "No." "For what?" "For making you apologize before you've even told me why you're here." Outside, thunder rolled through the valley. Inside, only the crackling fireplace answered us. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting between us since I opened the door. "Emma?" I glanced toward the bedroom where the little boy still slept peacefully. "Who is he?" She closed her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the mug until her knuckles turned white. When she opened them again, they were full of the kind of sadness that doesn't arrive overnight. "His name is Noah," she whispered. I nodded. "Is he your son?" Emma looked toward the hallway. For a long moment, she couldn't speak, then barely above a whisper, "No." A tear slipped down her cheek. "He's my sister's little boy." She swallowed hard. "And 2 nights ago," her voice broke completely, "he became all the family I have left." She didn't cry loudly. Emma had never been the kind of person who fell apart where other people could see it. Even when we were kids, she'd scrape her knees climbing trees, brush the dirt off with the back of her hand, and insist she wasn't hurt while tears balanced stubbornly in the corners of her eyes. Now she stared into the steam rising from her tea, exactly the same way. "My sister's name was Lily," she said quietly. "She was 4 years younger than me." I waited. People carrying grief usually didn't need questions, they needed room. She married a deputy sheriff named Owen 3 years ago. They weren't rich. They weren't perfect. A tired smile touched her lips. But they laughed a lot. I nodded. They had Noah 2 years later. She glanced toward the bedroom. Again, he thinks cartoons fix everything. They almost do. She looked at me. You still believe that? I believe pancakes fix the rest. That earned the smallest laugh. I missed that. What? You always find somewhere to hide a joke. I hide there. Myself. The smile faded from her face. It happened Monday night. Every word after that came slower than the one before. They were driving home from my parents' anniversary dinner. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the windows. A logging truck crossed the center line. She stopped. The silence finished the sentence for her. I'm sorry, I whispered. She nodded once. So am I. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. The fire crackled. The old clock ticked. Somewhere down the hallway, Noah sighed in his sleep. I got the phone call at 4:30 in the morning. Emma's eyes stayed fixed on the mug. I kept thinking somebody had made a mistake. They hadn't. No, she inhaled shakily. They hadn't. I wanted to reach across the room. Instead, I wrapped both hands around my own coffee mug. Some distances couldn't be crossed until the other person invited you. What happened after that? I asked gently. I buried my sister. The words landed between us with frightening simplicity. No parent should ever have to bury their child. My parents couldn't even stand. Her voice cracked again. So I planned everything. Flowers, music, paperwork, insurance. The little details nobody notices until they're suddenly responsible for all of them. I barely slept. You don't look like you did. I didn't. She gave a tired laugh. I forgot what day it was twice. Another silence settled. This one felt different, less guarded, more exhausted. And Noah? I asked. My parents wanted to keep him, didn't they? They're both sick. I frowned. My dad's Parkinson's has gotten worse. I'm sorry. My mum's heart isn't strong enough to raise a toddler. She rubbed both hands around the mug as though searching for warmth. So everyone agreed I'd become his guardian. That sounds reasonable. It did. Her eyes met mine. Until Owen's family showed up. Something in the way she said those words made my stomach tighten. They wanted Noah. Because he's their grandson? I wish. She looked away. Owen's grandfather owned almost 600 acres outside Franklin. I blinked. That's a lot. He passed away 6 months ago. Emma nodded. The estate hasn't been settled yet. I understood before she said the next part. Noah inherits everything. She closed her eyes. Almost $7 million. The number sat heavily inside the room. I leaned back slowly. So they suddenly remembered they loved him. Her jaw tightened. They didn't even come to his 2nd birthday. The bitterness in her voice surprised me. I kept telling myself maybe grief was making me unfair. And? They hired attorneys before the funeral. I stared at her. They what? They filed emergency custody papers. My grip tightened around the mug. 2 days after Lily died? She nodded. They said I wasn't stable enough. Based on what? She laughed once. There wasn't any humor in it. Based on the fact that I'm single. I felt something hot rise behind my ribs. They've never even changed one of his diapers. I know. They don't know what cereal he eats. I know. They don't know he gets scared whenever thunder starts. I know. She whispered those last 2 words so softly they almost disappeared. Then she looked toward the bedroom again. He runs to me every time. I followed her gaze. The hallway remained quiet. He thinks I'm enough. You are. Emma looked back at me. You don't know that. I know you. She stared for several seconds. No, she said quietly. You knew me. The correction hurt more than I expected. Because she was right. The woman sitting across from me had lived 8 years I knew nothing about. 8 birthdays, 8 Christmas mornings, 8 summers, 8 winters. Entire pieces of her life existed where I had once imagined myself standing. I don't know everything, I admitted. But I know this. She waited. You came here. Her eyebrows pulled together. You drove almost 4 hours in the middle of a storm. You remembered where I lived. You knocked on my door. You trusted me. I shrugged gently. That tells me enough. She looked down at the tea again. I almost didn't. What changed? I pulled into the gas station outside town. The old Sinclair? She blinked. You know it? I buy coffee there every Thursday. A tiny smile appeared. The cashier asked if I was visiting family. Were you? She shook her head. I started driving again. Then I reached the bridge. The covered bridge. Yes? She laughed quietly. I remembered you teaching me how to drive there. I almost put us in the river. You did put us in the ditch. I maintain that ditch appeared unexpectedly. It had been there for decades. I was improvising, she smiled into the mug. I hadn't smiled all week. I'm honored the ditch finally paid off. She shook her head. I sat on that bridge for almost 20 minutes, thinking, remembering. Her eyes lifted slowly. I kept asking myself one question. What? If there was still one place left in the world where I wouldn't have to explain why I was tired. The room became very quiet. And? You were the answer. Something shifted inside my chest. Not hope. Hope felt too dangerous. Something smaller, warmer, like finding an old photograph you thought had been lost forever. Ethan? Yeah? I know I don't deserve your kindness. I frowned immediately. Don't. That's true. No, I left. You did. I never called. You didn't. I broke your heart. The honesty caught me off guard. She wasn't asking forgiveness. She was simply telling the truth. I probably deserved that. You didn't. I handled it badly. You vanished, she nodded. I know. I spent almost a year wondering whether you'd died. Her face crumpled. I know. I called your old number. I changed it. I noticed. I wrote letters. She looked up sharply. You. What? I never mailed them. A sad smile appeared. That's somehow worse. They're probably still in a shoebox somewhere. I would have read every one. I know. She blinked. Then why didn't you send them? I looked toward the fire. Because every version ended with me asking why you left. And? I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Emma lowered her eyes. If I tell you now, she hesitated, you'll probably hate me. I almost smiled. You've clearly forgotten how stubborn I am. No. Her voice barely carried across the room. I never forgot anything about you. Before I could answer, a small voice drifted down the hallway. Emma! Both of us turned instantly. Tiny footsteps padded across the wooden floor. Noah appeared in the doorway, rubbing one sleepy eye with the sleeve of his little dinosaur pajamas. His blanket dragged behind him like a tiny blue cape. He looked around the unfamiliar cabin. His eyes landed on Emma. Then, without saying another word, he ran straight toward her. Emma was already kneeling before he reached her. He threw both little arms around her neck. I had a bad dream, he mumbled. She held him so gently it almost hurt to watch. I'm right here. I couldn't find you. You found me now. He nodded against her shoulder. Then his sleepy eyes wandered toward me. For several long seconds, he studied my face with the complete seriousness only small children seem capable of. Finally he whispered, Who's he? Emma brushed a strand of hair away from Noah's forehead before answering, This is Ethan. Noah looked back at me. He tilted his head. The way children do when they're trying to decide whether someone belongs in their world. Do you live here? I do. He looked around the cabin. You built all this? I smiled. Most of it. His eyes grew wider. Even the table. The table. The chairs. The chairs. The fireplace. I laughed. I wish. He considered that answer very seriously. You should build one. I'll add it to my list. He nodded, apparently satisfied. Emma rubbed slow circles across his back. I'm sorry he woke up. You apologized too much. So I've been told. Noah looked between us. Why are you smiling? Emma blinked. I didn't know I was. You are. Children noticed the things adults missed or tried to hide. She kissed the top of his head. You hungry, Bug? He thought for a second. My tummy says maybe. I stood. I think I have something that speaks toddler. Emma looked up. You still keep cereal for midnight emergencies? I upgraded. To what? Grilled cheese. Noah's face lit up. I like grilled cheese. I was hoping you'd say that. He looked at Emma for permission. She smiled. Go help him. Noah slipped from her lap and walked toward me with tiny, uncertain steps. Halfway across the room, he stopped. You got monsters? I frowned. What kind? The underbed kind. I looked around the cabin dramatically. I checked this morning. And? They all moved out. Why? They couldn't afford the rent. Noah frowned. Monsters have money. The smart ones do. He giggled. Emma covered her mouth to hide a laugh. For the first time since she'd arrived, the sadness lifted from her face, if only for a heartbeat. Noah reached for my hand without thinking. His fingers were tiny, warm, trusting. I glanced toward Emma. She watched us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Gratitude, relief, maybe both. The kitchen was barely large enough for 2 adults. Adding a curious 3-year-old made it feel crowded in the best possible way. Noah climbed onto one of the wooden stools and watched every move I made. Are you cook? I survive. Emma burns pancakes. From the living room, Emma called back. I heard that. So? You promised never to tell anyone. You promised me cookies. I was emotionally compromised. Noah laughed so hard he nearly slid off the stool. Are you funny? I've been told I'm tolerable. He watched me butter the bread. My daddy made grilled cheese. The knife paused in my hand. Emma went very still behind us. Noah didn't notice. He always made dinosaur ones. Dinosaur ones? They got little teeth. I swallowed carefully. I don't think mine have teeth. He considered that. They can still be dinosaurs. I appreciate your flexibility. He nodded like we'd just completed an important business negotiation. While the sandwiches browned in the pan, he looked around the kitchen. What's that? He pointed toward the workshop visible through the back window. My workshop. You make tables there? And chairs? And shelves? And mistakes? He smiled. My daddy made mistakes too. I'm in good company then. Emma leaned quietly against the doorway. She hadn't interrupted once. She simply watched, watching Noah laugh, watching me answer every impossible question with complete seriousness, watching something she'd probably been missing for days. Normal. When the sandwiches were ready, I cut Noah's into triangles. He frowned. My dinosaurs are sleepy. I'll wake them up next time. Okay. He took one bite, then another, then looked at me with complete confidence. You cook better than Emma. Emma gasped. I have been betrayed. You burn pancakes. I made you macaroni yesterday. It was crunchy. It was supposed to be creamy. Noah shrugged. I still ate it. Emma laughed properly that time, not politely, not carefully. It filled the little cabin like sunlight finding its way through storm clouds. I realized then how long it had probably been since either of them had heard laughter inside a home. Noah yawned halfway through his sandwich. His eyelids drooped. Emma crouched beside him. "Ready for bed again?" He nodded. But he looked at me. "Can he tell stories?" I blinked. "I don't know any good ones." "You make one." Emma smiled. "He always could." I looked at her. "I haven't told a bedtime story since my little cousin was 6. "Then you're overdue." Noah slid carefully off the stool and held up both arms. Without thinking, I picked him up. He rested his head against my shoulder almost immediately. Children had a remarkable way of deciding who felt safe. His small hand clutched the front of my flannel shirt. "I want the bear story." I looked at Emma helplessly. She whispered, "He asks for a different ending every night. That seems unfair. He's 3. Good point." I carried him down the hallway. The bedroom lamp still glowed softly. I tucked him beneath the quilt while he waited expectantly. I sat on the edge of the bed. Once upon a time there was a bear who hated winter. Noah frowned. Bears like winter. This one was difficult. Oh. He wanted summer all year because he loved blueberries. Me too, I suspected. So every spring he planted blueberry bushes outside his cave. Noah listened with complete concentration, but every winter the snow buried them. What happened? The bear got angry. Then his little fox friend showed him something. What? That roots keep growing, even when nobody can see them. Noah's eyes began to close. So when spring came, blueberries? So many blueberries the bear couldn't eat them all. He smiled sleepily. He shared. Good bear. Very good bear. His breathing slowed. Within another minute, he was asleep. I stayed there a little longer. Not because he needed me, because somehow I needed the quiet. When I walked back into the living room, Emma was standing by the fireplace, holding my empty coffee mug. She looked toward the hallway. "He likes you." I bribed him with cheese. She smiled faintly. "It usually takes him longer." "To trust people?" She nodded. "Since the accident." Her voice faded. "He wakes up looking for people who aren't there." I didn't know what to say. So I simply stood beside her. The fire cracked softly between us. After a while she whispered, "I forgot what peace sounded like." I looked into the flames. "I think it sounds a little like rain on a roof." She smiled, "And a child finally sleeping." That too. Another long silence settled. This one felt easier. Then Emma reached into the pocket of my hoodie. "I need to tell you why I really came." Something in her voice made every muscle in my body tighten. She pulled out her phone. The screen was dark, cracked across one corner. I turned it off before I knocked. "Why?" "Because if I hadn't," she looked at me, "I would have lost my nerve." She pressed the power button. The phone vibrated almost instantly, once, twice, then over and over again. Message after message flooded the screen, missed calls, voicemails, texts, dozens of them. My eyes caught one name repeating again and again, Daniel Brooks. I frowned. "Who's Daniel?" Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she unlocked the phone and silently handed it to me. The newest message sat at the top. "You can't hide him forever." My stomach dropped. I looked up. Emma. She took a slow, shaky breath. Then she whispered the sentence that changed everything. "Daniel isn't Noah's uncle." She looked toward the bedroom. "He's my husband, Daniel." The name echoed inside my head long after Emma stopped speaking. I looked back at the glowing phone screen. More messages appeared before my eyes. "Call me. This isn't helping your case. Think about Noah." Then another. "You know I can find you." I handed the phone back carefully. "You. You're married?" Emma nodded. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. "Legally." The single word carried years inside it. I leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to rearrange everything I thought I understood. When? 4 years ago. I let out a slow breath. So after you left Cedar Hollow. About 3 years after. I nodded once. Not because I understood, because I didn't trust myself to say anything else. Emma noticed. She always noticed. I know how this looks. I honestly don't know how it looks. She looked up. I didn't come here because I still love you. The sentence landed harder than I expected. Then she continued. I came because you're the only person I still trust. That hurt less, and somehow. More I folded my arms. So tell me about Daniel. She laughed quietly. There wasn't an ounce of happiness in it. I wish that story were short. We've got rain. She glanced toward the windows, and apparently nowhere to be. She sat back down on the couch. I stayed where I was. Some conversations needed distance. I met him in Nashville. You moved there after college. She nodded. I was 23. He owned a construction company. I waited. He was charming. Most people like that are. She smiled sadly. I thought he was confident. And he was controlling. The room grew still again. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. She looked at me with surprise. You know? My mother volunteered at a women's shelter. Emma blinked. I didn't know that. I didn't talk about it much. She nodded slowly. Daniel wasn't cruel in the beginning. He was thoughtful. Funny. He remembered birthdays. He sent flowers. He opened doors. Her smile disappeared. Then he started choosing my clothes. I stayed silent. He said he had better taste. She shrugged. I laughed. Then he started choosing my friends. He said they weren't good for me. Another pause. Then he chose where we lived. What jobs I should take. When I should visit my parents. When I shouldn't. I looked toward the dying fire, and by then, I couldn't tell where his opinions ended and mine were supposed to begin. She rubbed her hands together. I kept convincing myself marriage was just compromise. But compromise isn't supposed to make you disappear. The word settled heavily between us. I thought back over the Emma I used to know, the fearless girl who climbed onto barn roofs just to watch meteor showers, the teenager who argued with teachers because she believed they were wrong, the young woman who once drove 3 hours just to surprise me with birthday pie because she knew I hated cake. None of those versions sounded like someone who asked permission to exist. He ever hit you? The question came quietly. She answered just as quietly. No. Relief arrived, then immediately felt incomplete. He didn't have to. I understood. Some bruises never turned blue. They call it coercive control now. She smiled without humor. I didn't know there was a name for it. There usually is. I just kept thinking if I loved him better. Her voice faded. He'd become the man I married. I shook my head gently. No. I know that now. She stared into the fire. But it took years. Outside, thunder rolled again. Inside, Noah murmured something unintelligible in his sleep. Emma smiled automatically. Even exhausted, she listened for him. When Lily died, she continued, everything changed. How? I spent every day with Noah. He'd crawl into my lap, he'd laugh at cartoons, he'd cry because bananas broke in half. Despite everything, I smiled. Reasonable reaction. She smiled too. Exactly. Then I'd go home. Her expression dimmed. And realize I felt more like myself with a 3-year-old than with my own husband. The sentence lingered. I started noticing things. What things? How quiet I had become. How often I apologized. How many decisions I asked permission for. She swallowed. Lily noticed too. I looked at her. What did she say? Emma's eyes filled. She told me, her voice cracked. You're disappearing right in front of me. She covered her mouth. I laughed. I told her she was dramatic. A tear escaped. She hugged me before I left. Emma closed her eyes. That was the last conversation we ever had. Neither of us spoke. Some grief refused company. After nearly a minute, she whispered, "I keep hearing her voice. Don't wait until you forget who you are." The fire popped loudly. Emma wiped her eyes quickly. I didn't listen. "You did eventually," she nodded. Too late for her. "No." She looked up. "No. You listened while she was still able to change your life." She stared at me. "I've restored a lot of broken furniture." I glanced toward the bookshelf. "You know what I've learned?" "What?" "Some cracks never disappear." She waited. "But that doesn't stop the table from holding a family together." Emma's eyes shimmered. "You always did talk like somebody's grandfather." "I've embraced the aesthetic." She laughed through tears. "I missed that." "I know." Another silence settled. This one wasn't awkward. It simply existed. Then something occurred to me. "Emma." "If Daniel isn't Noah's father," she nodded, "why is he sending messages about him?" Her face changed immediately. The warmth disappeared. Fear took its place. She unlocked the phone again, scrolled upward, then handed it back. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a photograph. Daniel stood outside a courthouse wearing sunglasses. Beside him, two expensive-looking lawyers. One of them held a folder with Noah's name printed clearly across the front. I frowned. "What is this?" Emma folded her arms tightly around herself. "He made a deal." "What kind of deal?" She looked toward the hallway, the kind that could take Noah away from me. My stomach tightened. "I don't understand." She took one long breath, then quietly said, "Owen's parents aren't paying those lawyers." I looked back at the picture. A terrible feeling crept through me. Emma confirmed it before I could ask. "Daniel is." I stared at the photograph for several long seconds. Daniel looked perfectly composed, pressed white shirt, expensive watch, one hand tucked casually into his pocket. The kind of man who could smile while ruining someone's life and still convince the room he was being reasonable. The lawyers standing beside him weren't smiling. They didn't need to. People who billed by the hour rarely did. I handed the phone back carefully. "Why?" Emma's fingers curled around the edge of the device. "Because Daniel knows someone in Owen's family." "How well?" "They play golf together." I waited. "They've been friends for years. So when Lily and Owen died, he volunteered to help." She laughed bitterly. I actually thanked him. The sound faded almost as quickly as it appeared. I thought he was trying to support me. And he wasn't. He was introducing them to the attorneys they needed. The realization settled heavily inside the cabin. He wants custody of Noah. She shook her head. "No." "Then what does he want?" My silence. I frowned. Emma leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "If Owen's parents get custody, they'll control Noah's inheritance until he turns 18. I nodded slowly. "And Daniel?" "He wants to invest part of the estate through his construction company." I stared at her. "That's millions of dollars." "Yes." "And if you're Noah's guardian?" I refused to sign anything. The pieces finally began fitting together. "So he needs you out of the way." Emma nodded once. "He told me I was grieving. He said I wasn't thinking clearly. He wanted me to come home, sign temporary guardianship papers, and let everyone else handle the legal details." She made quotation marks in the air with tired fingers. I asked for copies. "And?" He got angry. "How angry?" "He didn't yell." She looked toward the fire. "Daniel almost never yells." "What did he do?" He smiled. A chill ran through me. "I've learned that's worse." "She swallowed," he said. Her voice grew quieter. "You'll lose him eventually, Emma." Silence. "The only question is whether you make this difficult for everyone." I looked toward the hallway. Noah was asleep barely 20 feet away, completely, unaware that adults were quietly deciding the direction of his entire childhood. When did you leave? Yesterday morning. You packed and drove here? I packed while Daniel was at work. She smiled weakly. I only took what fit in 2 bags. What about your house? I don't know. My job? I don't know. My marriage? She closed her eyes. I think I already know. The rain outside softened to a gentle rhythm. For the first time all night, neither of us rushed to fill the silence. Eventually I stood. You hungry? She looked surprised. Really? What? That's your question? No. I walked toward the kitchen. It's my solution. She watched me open the refrigerator. Ethan, I've learned something. What? Nobody thinks clearly on an empty stomach. A small smile appeared. You still believe food fixes everything. It fixes enough. She laughed quietly. You haven't changed. I pulled out eggs, bread, butter. What do you feel like? I honestly don't know. That's okay. I held up the carton. The eggs seem confident. She shook her head. You are unbelievable. I've been called worse. I disappeared for 8 years. You did. I show up after midnight. You did. I bring a toddler. You certainly did. I'm technically still married. I nodded. Also true. And you're making scrambled eggs. I make excellent scrambled eggs. She covered her face with both hands. A muffled laugh escaped between her fingers. I hadn't realized how badly I wanted to hear that sound again. There she is. She looked up. Who? The girl who laughed with her whole face. Her smile faded into something gentler. I thought she was gone. I didn't. She looked away before I could read her expression. While the butter melted in the pan, she wandered slowly around the cabin. Her fingertips brushed across the bookshelf, the window frame, the old record player near the fireplace. You still have this? It still barely works. She picked up one of the vinyl records. I bought you this. You did. I was 19. You insisted classic rock would improve my personality. Did it? I became slightly more dramatic. I don't believe you. I cried during a dog food commercial last week. She laughed again. That's progress. The eggs finished cooking. We ate at the tiny kitchen table where we'd once spent an entire summer planning impossible futures. Back then, we'd talked about traveling, starting a business together, owning a little house with a wraparound porch. Neither of us had imagined this version of adulthood. Halfway through her plate, Emma set down her fork. I need to ask you something. Okay. If, she hesitated, if they come here. They? Daniel, Owen's parents, the lawyers. She met my eyes. I don't want you dragged into this. I leaned back in my chair. I appreciate that. I'm serious, so am I. You could lose business. I repair chairs. Ethan, I'm not exactly protecting classified government secrets. She smiled despite herself. I'm still asking. I thought about the workshop behind the cabin, my clients, my quiet life. Then I thought about Noah asleep in the next room, about Emma arriving soaked to the bone because somewhere inside all her fear, she still believed this was the safest door she could knock on. The answer came more easily than I expected. When we were 16, I said, you climbed onto the roof of the old school gym. She blinked. What? You remember? Barely. You called me because you got stuck. She laughed. I did not get stuck. You absolutely got stuck. I was evaluating my options. You cried. I was allergic to heights. You climbed the roof. I made a series of poor decisions. I smiled. You know what I remember most? What? You didn't ask if I'd come. You just said. I looked at her. I knew you would. Emma stared at me. I remember. You trusted me then. I shrugged gently. You trusted me tonight. She lowered her eyes. So, I'm not going anywhere. The room fell quiet. Not dramatic, not romantic, just honest. Emma looked down at her hands for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice barely carried across the table. I was so afraid. Of what? That I'd already used up the right to come back. I reached across the table without thinking, not to hold her hand, just to rest mine there. Close enough. If home ever keeps score, I said quietly, it isn't home. Her eyes filled instantly. She looked at my hand, then at me. For one suspended heartbeat, it seemed like she might reach across the table, too. Instead, a loud engine growled somewhere outside the cabin. Both of us froze. Headlights swept across the living room window, then stopped. Emma's face lost every trace of color. She whispered only 2 words. They found us. Emma was already standing before I reached the window. She didn't rush. She froze. Sometimes fear didn't make people run. Sometimes it rooted them exactly where they were. The headlight stayed pointed toward the cabin, cutting long white bars across the wooden floor. Neither of us spoke. Even the old refrigerator seemed to stop humming. Ethan, her voice barely existed. They don't know this place. You sure? She nodded too quickly. I never. Then she stopped. What? I only told one person. My stomach tightened. Who? My mother. The answer hung in the room. She closed her eyes. I asked her not to tell anyone. I looked through the narrow gap in the curtains. An old pickup truck, dark green. Mud splashed across both doors. Not a luxury SUV. Not black government-looking vehicles. Just one weathered truck with its headlights still on. The driver's door opened. A man climbed out. Mid-60s baseball cap, heavy work boots, gray beard. He stood beside the truck for a moment, looking toward the cabin as though trying to decide whether to knock. Emma let out the breath she'd been holding. Oh, you know him? She nodded. That's Mr. Harlan. The neighbor from your parents' farm? You remember him? He once chased me with a rake because we stole peaches. Emma almost smiled. You deserved that. I maintain the peaches were emotionally available. She laughed quietly. It really is you. The old man climbed the porch steps and knocked twice. Gentle knocks. Patient ones. I looked toward Emma. You want me to answer? She nodded. I don't think he'd hurt anyone. I opened the door. Cold air drifted inside. Mr. Harlan removed his cap immediately. Ethan. Evening. He looked past me toward Emma. There you are. Emma stepped closer. Mr. Harlan. His weathered face softened. Oh, sweetheart. He opened his arms. Emma walked into them before another word could be spoken. The hug lasted longer than either of them expected. When they finally stepped apart, he wiped one eye with the back of his hand. Your mama's worried sick. Emma looked down. I know. I told her I'd look. You didn't tell anyone where I was? He shook his head immediately. No. I told her I'd find you first. Relief visibly passed across Emma's face. Thank you. He nodded once. Then his expression grew serious. They're looking. My shoulders stiffened. Who? Owen's daddy. The lawyers. And your husband. Emma closed her eyes. I figured. Mr. Harlan glanced toward me. You Ethan? I am. He stuck out a rough hand. Heard about you for 20 years. I shook it, hopefully only the good parts. He smiled. Mostly. Emma rolled her eyes. He means the tractor incident. I was framed. You drove through Mrs. Collins's mailbox. The mailbox attacked first. Mr. Harlan laughed. Still got that mouth. I've matured. Not enough. For one tiny moment. The years disappeared. Emma looked from him to me. The corners of her eyes softened. Then reality returned. Mr. Harlan reached into his coat pocket. I brought this. He handed Emma a folded envelope. She frowned. What's this? Your mama. Emma unfolded it slowly. Inside, only a single sheet of paper. Her eyes moved across the handwriting. Halfway through, her lips began trembling. "What?" I asked gently. She handed me the letter. It wasn't long. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means you're somewhere you finally felt safe enough to stop driving. I won't tell anyone where you are. Not Daniel, not the lawyers, not even your father. I should have protected you years ago when you kept saying you were fine. I believed your smile because it was easier than asking why it looked tired. That was my mistake. Don't come home because you feel guilty. Come home only when you feel free. And if Ethan opened his door, tell him thank you for doing what I should have done sooner. Love, Mom." I folded the paper carefully. Emma couldn't speak. Mr. Harlan looked toward the fire. "She's blaming herself." Emma nodded through tears. "It wasn't her fault." "No," he sighed, "but mothers don't usually believe that." Silence settled again. Then the old man cleared his throat. "I didn't just come with a letter." Emma looked up. "What happened?" "They filed this afternoon." My stomach tightened. "Court?" He nodded. "Emergency hearing." "When?" "Friday morning." Emma's face drained again. "That's..." She counted silently. 2 days. Judge'll decide temporary custody until the full trial." She gripped the edge of the table. "I don't even have a lawyer." "I know." "I barely have clean clothes." "I know." "I don't know what I'm doing." Mr. Harlan stepped closer. "No." He smiled gently. "You're doing exactly what your sister would have wanted." Emma looked away before another tear escaped. He reached into his jacket once more. "This one's for Ethan." He handed me a business card. Simple. White. One name. Margaret Ellis, family law attorney. I looked up. "Who's she?" "My niece." He smiled proudly. "Meanest lawyer in 3 counties. Emma actually laughed. "That's quite an introduction." "It's accurate." He pointed toward the card. "She owes me 3 favors. She hates bullies, and she works miracles. Hope, tiny, fragile, but real." It entered the room for the first time that night. Mr. Harlan checked his watch. "I better get going." Emma hugged him again before he reached the door. "Thank you." He kissed the top of her head, like she'd never stopped being the little girl next door. "How stop apologizing so much?" she sniffled. "I'm trying." "Good." Then he looked at me. "Ethan." "Sir?" He lowered his voice. "Take care of him." I nodded once. "I will." He studied my face for a second, apparently satisfied. Then he disappeared back into the rain. The truck's engine started. Headlights slowly turned around moments later. The darkness outside belonged only to the storm again. I locked the door. Neither Emma nor I spoke immediately. She stood by the window, holding her mother's letter against her chest. Finally she whispered, "I forgot what it felt like." "What?" "To have people choose me." I looked at her quietly. "You didn't forget." She frowned. "No. You just stopped believing they would." Her eyes met mine. There were 100 things neither of us said. About 8 missing years, about old love, about the way she still looked at me sometimes before remembering she wasn't supposed to. Instead, a tiny voice drifted down the hallway. "Emma?" Both of us turned at the same time. Noah stood in the doorway again. His blanket dragged behind him. His sleepy eyes blinked toward us. Then he looked at Emma. "Bad dream." She immediately knelt. "What happened?" He rubbed his eyes. "I dreamed everybody kept leaving." Emma's heart broke visibly. She gathered him into her arms. "No," she whispered into his hair. "I'm right here." Noah looked over her shoulder at me. His tiny voice was barely louder than the rain outside. "Is he staying too?" For a second, neither Emma nor I answered. Noah looked over Emma's shoulder at me. His tiny voice was barely louder than the rain outside. Is he staying too? For one suspended second, neither of us answered. Emma looked at me first, not because she didn't know what to say, because she wanted the answer to be mine. I walked across the room until I was standing in front of them. Then I crouched to Noah's height. If you'll let me. He studied my face with complete seriousness. You don't got anywhere else? I smiled. I live here. He nodded slowly, processing that. So, you won't leave? Children asked impossible questions in the simplest ways. I glanced at Emma. She was watching me with wet eyes, waiting. I looked back at Noah. No, I said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. He seemed satisfied with that answer. He wrapped one sleepy arm around Emma's neck again and yawned. I'm tired. I know, Bug. She carried him back toward the bedroom. Halfway down the hallway she stopped and looked over her shoulder. Ethan. Yeah? Thank you. I shook my head. You don't have to keep saying that. I know. She smiled softly. I just needed you to hear it one more time. I watched until the bedroom door closed behind them. The cabin became quiet again. Only the rain remained. I walked into the kitchen and began rinsing the dishes we'd forgotten on the table. Normal things, simple things. Sometimes they kept a person from thinking too far ahead. The custody hearing. Daniel.lawyers. The inheritance. Every problem was still waiting for us when the sun came up. None of it had disappeared. But for the first time that night, Emma wasn't carrying it alone. I turned off the kitchen light and checked the front door one last time before stretching out on the couch. The blanket barely covered my feet. It never had. Around 3 in the morning, soft footsteps crossed the wooden floor. I opened my eyes. Emma stood beside the couch, still wearing my oversized hoodie. The hallway light behind her painted a pale outline around her hair. I'm sorry, she whispered. Did Noah wake up? She shook her head. No. Everything okay? Another small shake of her head. Not really. I sat up. What happened? She hugged her arms around herself. I forgot how quiet could sound. I waited. She looked toward the dark window. For years. I couldn't sleep unless the television was on. I frowned. Why? She hesitated. Daniel hated silence. So he kept something playing all the time. News, music, podcasts. Anything. She gave a sad little laugh. I think he was afraid silence might let people think. The words settled heavily between us. And now, she looked around the cabin. I've never heard a house this quiet. I smiled gently. Does it bother you? She thought about it, then slowly shook her head. No. A tear rolled down her cheek. It feels. She searched for the right word. Safe. Neither of us moved. Neither of us needed to. After a moment she stepped closer. Not enough to touch me. Just close enough that the years between us felt a little smaller. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. Neither do I. I might lose. You might. My whole life could change. It already has. She looked at me. You still think I'm worth all this trouble? I laughed quietly. You once drove 2 hours because I told you I had the flu. She smiled. You wanted tomato soup. You brought 6 cans. You looked pathetic. I did. You still do a little. I placed a hand over my chest. That was unnecessary. It was accurate. For the first time since she'd arrived, her smile reached her eyes. Real unforced. The same smile that used to convince me every bad day eventually ended. She looked toward the bedroom where Noah slept peacefully, then back at me. I don't know what happens after Friday, I nodded. We'll figure out Friday on Friday. She laughed softly. You always break impossible things into smaller pieces. It's easier to carry them that way. She looked at me for a long moment, Then, before either of us could overthink it, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. Not tightly, not desperately, just enough to say, "Thank you." I returned the hug just as gently. No promises, no old confessions, no rushing 8 missing years into one emotional night. Only two people who had once meant everything to each other, finding the courage to stand in the same place again. After a few seconds, she stepped back. "Good night, Ethan. Good night, Emma." She disappeared down the hallway. I listened as the bedroom door clicked softly shut. Outside, the storm finally began to drift away. The wind grew quieter. The rain became little more than a whisper against the roof. For the first time in years, my cabin no longer felt empty. Not because old love had magically returned, not because every wound had healed, but because hope had quietly knocked on my door at 1:12 in the morning, holding a sleepy little boy and asking for one more chance. I never expected that answering the door would change my life, but as dawn slowly painted the mountains beyond my porch, I realized something simple. Some people come back to rewrite the past. Others come back to begin the future they were always meant to have. And somehow, standing in my quiet little cabin with tomorrow still uncertain, I finally understood the difference